This is the BioCentury Show.
Brought to you by BioCentury Grand Rounds. Join BioCentury this September in Amsterdam for the second Grand Rounds Europe, an R&D forum focused on translational science at the interface of industry and academia.
It's a real pleasure today to speak with a friend, Dr. Jeremy Levin. Jeremy has worn so many hats that it would take half of our podcast to describe them. Maybe that's why it's going to smooth his head a little bit. A few pertinent ones for today's discussion. He's been CEO of Teva, chairman of Bio, and is the author of a book that I recommend, Biotech in the Balance. For decades, along with leadership positions in large and small biopharma companies, he's challenged the biopharma industry to live up to its ideals, to fulfill the social contract that makes it possible to turn science into medicine. And so I want to talk to him about the biotech industry and about the future of the biotech industry. But Jeremy, I want to start with something else, something personal. Who are your heroes in biotech and beyond?
Oh, in biotech, it's absolutely straightforward. Henry Tamir. Henry was not just somebody who was a teacher to me and a mentor, but somebody who actually taught me some fundamental principles that I thoroughly engaged with, and literally brought me in, sat me down and said, there's only one thing that counts, it's passion. And then having worked with him, I learned a tremendous amount. Beyond, there are many. I am incredibly impressed and deeply inspired by President Zelensky, somebody who I find stands up for commitment, bravery in the face of enormous odds. Nelson Mandela was a total hero to me and my family. We knew him, at least my father knew him, and we supported his ideals and his thinking. And then when you look beyond that, when that's the sort of social political environment, and there are very few people who stand at the level of these people in the recent history, you then have to turn to some of the patients. Honestly, outside of our industry as a doctor, I've met extraordinary people any number of them. There's whole patient bodies, Steve, who every day that you sit with them, whether they're dying and they want to talk to you, or whether they are simply a parent willing to put their child into your hands in a clinical trial or in a medical moment. Those are my heroes. So it's a diverse.
I think that's a good way to start. I think it's a good way to start our discussion. Thinking about the patients, thinking about Henry Tamir. I also knew Henry, not as well as you did, but he's one of my heroes also. So I want to start then with more specific about biotech. So the way I look at it, the success of the American biotech industry rests on four legs: generous support for basic scientific research, strong IP protections, an independent science-based regulatory system, and pricing that rewards innovation. And maybe a fifth that isn't so specific to life sciences, which is an immigration system that welcomes the best and the brightest to study and work in the United States. How strong are these legs today?
Steve, every single one of those is rattling. Those legs are not firm. They were. And in fact, if you go back, they didn't just appear. They arrived with deep thought starting in 1947 when the NIH was created. And from there, this enormous ecosystem gradually built out. The foundations of it were very, very thoughtful. It wasn't some grand view that there was going to be a biotech industry. There was a grand view that innovation mattered and that America would lead with innovation, and a concept behind that said, this is what we're going to need in order to build it. Those legs are all under assault. And there are different reasons for that, but I think we should pick them one by one and ask the questions, what is rattling them. But that's exactly why I wrote the book now. It's exactly why we need to internalize this moment. And it's exactly why we as an industry should stop being self-content and absolutely focus on the possibility that this industry will not look anything like it did today in 5 years' time.
And you know what? One of the things that strikes me, and I alluded to it in my introduction, is that you haven't hesitated to speak out about these issues when you've been at big companies, small companies. But a lot of your peers, especially those in the biggest companies, who are the ones who are the most politically influential, don't speak out. You know, so a recent example, the Trump administration, to be specific, the OMB director Vaught's proposals to politicize, and I would say really to decimate American science. Um, I wrote an editorial calling for the leaders of the biggest multinational pharmaceutical companies to speak out, because I think they're the people who have the most influence with President Trump, who could overrule this. They didn't. They put out a statement through the trade association Pharma, which in my view wasn't very bold and wasn't very what it didn't meet the moment. Why do you think that others don't speak up? What are the consequences of that?
There are many reasons why each individual doesn't speak up, but at its core, there are really two legs. One, fear of retribution personally, and two, failure to understand their critical role in society. Let me deal with the second of these, and then let's go back to the fear. It is absolutely clear from history that when industrial titans do not speak out at a moment of political change or stress, that in fact they enable, not reduce, they enable the behavior of a leader or an administration that is intent or is by default harming an industry or even a nation. And it means that the industrial titans have failed to understand that they are not shareholder responsive, but in fact they are responsible for stakeholders.
And you're really alluding to the 1930s there.
I definitely am,
Yeah,
but not just. You can look across recent changes in Russia. You don't have to go back to the 1930s. You can look what happened in Turkey. Same thing. Turkey, Russia, doesn't matter. Same principle applies across. When titans don't speak up, governments who are dependent upon them for revenues, for taxes, for employment, think that they are complicit. So that's one element. And it's a question then of the boards of those companies making a decision whether or not they believe they are part of society and critical part of it or not. And you can argue, in fact, this is going to become much more important because while we have three arms of government today, there is an unseen fourth arm, and that is the industrial arm. These giant companies that have the economic power of nations. And in the absence of a clear decision on the boards that they're going to exercise responsible behavior in a society, you have to ask the question, what is that board's role? What is the CEO's role? And it's not just to shareholders. It's patients, it's families, it's society. So number one, I think there's a mistaken understanding of what their role is. Number two is fear. There is little doubt that administrations can be very vindictive. But I would offer you something else. If we do not stand up to that in the courts, then what are we doing? Are we afraid and keeping silent because we don't believe that the courts will defend us? We don't believe in the justice system that we have? Or are we afraid physically? And as you know, Steve. There have been people who physically threatened me. There have people who have economically threatened me. And my view on this is the price that one pays for being a leader. If you're not a leader and you're afraid to state your views openly and clearly, then you have definitely betrayed your role.
Well, and there's another interpretation, of course, is that they have views that are different from what you think that they ought to be. And I have another question which kind of follows on that, which is something we talked about a long time ago. I think you wrote something in BioCentury about this in 2016, which was the way that CEOs of large pharma companies are compensated, the formulas that are used to compensate them. You argued back then that it doesn't create an incentive structure that rewards innovation, that rewards the creation of an ecosystem that advances science in the best interests of patients. Do you still believe that?
100%. Biotech CEOs are incented by equity, by the success of their products. And if their products are successful, if they go through development, they will be rewarded by the equity. They're not rewarded by and large, by sales. They're not rewarded by earnings per share. Their entire compensation is about how do you actually get something novel into the market. If you examine generally the compensation of large company CEOs, the levers that drive their compensation are earnings per share, top line sales growth or maintenance, and sometimes shareholder return over the long term, but mostly over the near term. None of that relates to innovation. Let me walk you through that. Top line can be achieved by simply price rise. That structure is not carved out in any of the compensation packages of CEOs. Bottom line can be solved extraordinarily simply. You simply buy back some shares. Or if you want to increase the amount of compensation on the bottom line, you can slow down research, cut some costs, and pay out a bigger dividend. This is very straightforward. There is no incentive for some key elements that are critical to ensure innovation. For example, number one, net new sales of an innovative drug that you've launched. Doesn't happen. Another one, which is incredibly important to sustain yourselves, is increasing the number of patients that are on and retain on your drug. They keep on using your drug. They don't stop at the end of the year. Critically important. So my view is very clear. This is what drives many of the large acquisitions that we've seen, endeavoring to keep a top line, endeavoring to keep earnings, and systematically saying, well, we're going to solve for this when we buy another company. We can actually solve for this by so-called synergies. This has driven an enormous amount of very good companies to buy all sorts of bad companies or proposed bad mergers, and result in what we've seen over the years, decades and decades of consolidation, some of which was good 20 years ago, but today represents a direct threat to innovation.
Thanks, Jeremy. We're gonna take a quick break, and we'll be right back. When we get back, we're going to talk about what everybody wants to talk about: China.
Looking forward to it.
The second edition of BioCentury Grand Rounds Europe convenes the leaders shaping the future of biopharma. This time we meet in Amsterdam, September 23rd to 25th, gathering academic innovators, biotech CEOs, pharma R&D leaders and investors to debate the translational science that will define the next decade. Grand Rounds Europe focuses on what matters most: breakthrough biology, transformative technologies, and how to make early-stage R&D investable. Grand Rounds is where rigorous science meets real-world execution. Join BioCentury and regional host chairs Forbion and BGV and take a deep dive on translational opportunities in the Benelux region. BioCentury Grand Rounds Europe, where discovery moves toward impact. Register at biocenturygramrounds.com.
I'm back with Jeremy Levin. Jeremy, let's talk about China. That's what everybody in Washington's talking about when they're talking about life sciences now. Threat, opportunity, or both?
I think it's too much of a binary definition. China is simple as that. I've known China since 1974. I've been there just post the Mao Revolution and gone through its evolution from when people were dragging things through the streets, when they were told to catch birds in the streets of China to keep away from them eating the rice, all the way through to what you see today. I've run businesses there. I've had API businesses there. I've sold drugs in the country. And I've even have a Chinese name allocated to me because of the extensive work that I did there. But the one thing I've known about China is that it is a methodical, clear, strategic intent in our industry, just as it has for all industries. So when we try and capture what China is and isn't, I think we need to start with the premise. China is. China has clearly defined how it's going to build its industry and its society. And while we can debate whether elements of this are strong or weak, the bottom line is these are long-term. They match the scale, for example, of biotech. They understand what it is to have a 25-year strategic plan, building those legs that you talked about before, the science, the talent, the abilities, the regulatory capabilities. All of these are created. And they've done this systematically with 5 different statements over the last nearly 20 years, each one coming at a time, building up from the ability to create APIs, testing ability of different assets, then building what we call copycats, now in the next phase, which is creating highly innovative drugs. And lastly, the step which is coming, which is when, as they've said, they will be the predominant provider of novel new medicines by 2035. That is a statement. They're clearly going down the path. They've not hidden any of this. They've brought back the turtles as the people who were trained abroad, but not just the people. They've learned from the FDA. They've learned from the EMEA. They've learned from the regulatory authorities around the world. So they've also started to loosen up some of their capital capabilities, Hong Kong, Shanghai funds, building centers there. To my mind, this is something that we have seen evolve in front of our eyes, and we've done nothing about it, except we have put up barriers, which I think some of them are very appropriate, to the loss of technologies that have dual use. Very important. However, what we haven't done is the converse, strengthen our own system. We've in fact weakened ours. We've weakened our NIH. We've weakened our FDA. We've weakened the very elements that drive the science innovation in our country. We stopped immigration, an extraordinary thing to have done. And at the same time, we've not sat down and looked at our capital markets and said, gee, we had this crazy little industry grow up from a few companies in San Francisco and Boston. Now it's 1,000 companies, and now it's producing 70% of all novel drugs. We're at the top of the world. We need to understand what that means for the capital markets. What's that mean to incent the managers of funds who are every day going out and risking their money in our companies? Done none of that. We basically said, let's beat on this industry. let's restrict it, let's undermine the science, and let's go ahead and stop immigration of the best people in the world to come and work with us. Does that help us? On top of that, we're having to now deal with most favored nation pricing. We have to deal with the PBMs. And then when you layer on top of that, the tremendous distrust of medicines and vaccines that has permeated the United States, we've kind of gone onto the football field of biotech, facing, I don't know, let's say, facing the world's best football team, and we can debate who that is, but I have my view, you might have yours, and we've taken away the cleats, taken away the helmets, taken away the padding from our team. And from my perspective, that just is shameful. We built ourselves into the best, most fundamental industry. We have the best science. We have some of the most remarkable venture capitalists. And yet, innovation is migrating right out of this country. Capital will follow it. We've already seen large pharmaceutical companies, BMS obviously being the poster child for that, doing the first deal, but it's not the only one. And that's what they should be doing. So is it a threat or a benefit? I don't view it. I view it, China is there. We need to be able to deal with it. I like competition. I think competition is good. America can outcompete any nation if they want to. The question is, do we have the will? And are we going to take the steps that are required to turn us into the powerhouse that we were, that is now stuttering along? And frankly, it's a shame, because we should look at China as an opportunity, from my perspective, to build ourselves, to learn from them. They learn from us. I'm happy to learn from them. Let's compete with them. Let's create a robust environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting, if you think about it, is that China did build this industry from nothing, right? Like you, I was first in China in the early 1980s and saw that and saw the whole country evolve, and I've been watching the biopharma industry evolve. They built it from nothing. They did it very intentionally, which shows that if the United States or any other country wanted to and devoted the resources to doing it, they could do the same. We're in this hole. We've dug a hole for ourselves, but we could get out of it. Some of the people in Washington, I live in Washington, and some of the people in Washington view this as they frame it as a national security threat, and then they reach for the tools that they've reached for in other national security to deal with other kinds of national security threats. They reach for protectionism. They reach for, erecting barriers to allowing Chinese drugs that have been developed in China to be approved in the United States or marketed in the United States, or creating barriers to it. Others they propose kind of facile solutions. There are people out there who say, oh, all we need to do is invest in autonomous robotic labs and wave an AI wand over everything, and we're going to be just fine. What's your response to that? What do you think in a concrete way the U.S. should be doing?
Number one, and this is critical, the United States must make a determination that the biotech industry, I'm not talking about the pharmaceutical companies, they are a different breed. They never sell stock. They're great at developing drugs, and they've got global reach. Not them. They never, ever come to the capital markets except for debt. So they're a different breed. We sell stock. We have enormous numbers of high-tech employees. We have people who are deeply vested in patient care, and we develop novel drugs. Different story. We need to take that 1,000 to 2,000 companies and make a statement, a clear, fundamental statement, that group, that defined box, is a national strategic asset. That group deserves the attention in the finance committee, in the taxation, in all elements of regulatory, need to be seen differently, need to be seen as something crucial for the health of America. If we do that, everything else flows from it.
So one of the legs that I proposed at the beginning of our interview was an environment in the United States a pricing environment that rewards innovation. And that I think that's actually probably the most controversial aspect of it. And as you just pointed out, it's really the most fundamental thing. If you have that, everything else can flow. If you don't have it, nothing's going to happen. How do you think about the pricing issue? How do you think about making that something that that the country will support, that politicians can support? Because there's nothing, I think, that has more broad spread political appeal today than proposing price controls on biopharmaceuticals.
Yes, and there are several things that feed into this. The first is that why are we beaten on? The answer is we've lost the trust of the electorate. How did we do that? This goes back to a period of time before you and I were really just getting our feet under the table in the industry. It comes from the pharmaceutical industry rapidly raising prices, being an industry that saw this decades ago as an industry much like selling cars, except that you could raise the price every year. This was a moment of loss for our industry, because what happened is that the innovative industry was suddenly put into the position of defending prices of drugs that they'd never, ever actually even developed. There were old drugs. Peter Kolchinsky has a really clear view of this, and I admire him for this. Essentially, we have a great system. We have a patent cliff. When the patent's done, you basically hand over the price of that drug, and it should drop dramatically no matter what. So there are really ways of dealing with pricing based on the existing system if we want to do that.
So it's a fundamental, it's a social contract. But the other part of the social contract, the thing that makes it work, is out of the hands, I think, of the biopharma industry, which is insurance companies and payers.
Totally.
If
Totally.
if the price of the most innovative drugs today were cut in half, nobody could afford them, right? The only way that we get access to the drugs, to the medicines that we need, is to have an insurance system that works and that people feel is fair.
I totally agree with you. What is it in our wildest dreams that we want a patient to go to the pharmacy, reach into their pocket and pay cash for a drug and be told, well, you've got to have some skin in the game? Excuse me, they're dying, they're sick, they don't need to be having skin in the game. Second point is, we have the most complex intermediaries which add zero value to a medicine. When that medicine walks off the lab bench into a bottle, then that's just the beginning. There are layer and layer and layer, as you know, of people holding out their hands. Chief amongst them is the PBMs. Now, as you know, the PBMs, which were highly profitable, were all scooped up and integrated into insurance companies. This is about the most extraordinary opportunity that exists. We should just take them out of the equation, get rid of them completely. And in fact, insurance companies should be covering the sick. Simple as that. And what you do then is you offer the compact has to be that when your patent runs out, the drug, whatever it is, you do not try and extend it for 20, 30 years by building patent thickets. You don't try and build franchises around a biologic saying, I've got this slight improvement. You actually agree that it's going away. You agree that that compact that you've made with the patient is going to exist, and you get paid exceptionally well while it's under patent. When it's not, it's a generic, and you move on. And you invent something new.
And well, it's got to be more than people agree. I think it's got to be enforced, because we've seen this movie before. We got into this place because people said that they agreed with that and then didn't do it. So there has to be a way to enforce it.
Well, it goes back to compensation, doesn't it? When I said to you that CEOs should be compensated for net new sales, that's keeping patients on, of novel drugs and not for price rises, that's where it comes in. So every single pharmaceutical company would be dumping its generic drug in a heartbeat if they felt they were going to get compensated for a novel drug that they launched.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, we're coming close to the end of the time that we've got. I want to end it in an optimistic note. What is it that that makes you excited about the next 10 years in biotech and medicine?
Oh, very straightforward. We are at, I am completely convinced we are on an extraordinary trajectory of innovation, a kind that we've never seen. And that innovation in and of itself, it has the power to change what we're doing. And by that, I mean the industry, what the industry is doing. And I'm not talking about AI. AI is interesting. I'm talking about the pure unraveling of biological understanding of diseases that we've never thought possible, but now we can tackle. We thought it was impossible to tackle many of them. I believe that that gives me immense optimism. Second thing that gives me optimism is the way that young doctors are talking. Young doctors are talking about patients. They really don't like the system that they're in. They will make a change in that. They will insist on a change. And insurance companies will have to start listening to them at some stage. And hopefully they'll get the support of the administration to make the changes that those young doctors really need. They believe in patients, innovation's driving patients, and I believe there's capital to support it. So I'm extraordinarily optimistic, and I've never been otherwise. I just simply think in order to be effective and optimistic, you need to look in the mirror and understand exactly what's going on in our industry. And you need to understand it is definitely in the balance, but we can redress that balance.
Well, thanks, Jeremy, as always, for a great conversation, for extraordinary thoughtfulness, and let's do it again soon.
I look forward to it, and thank you, and thank BioCentury.
Brought to you by BioCentury Grand Rounds. Join BioCentury this September in Amsterdam for the second Grand Rounds Europe, an R&D forum focused on translational science at the interface of industry and academia.